こんにちは、ハリケーンフットボールです。今回の教材は、レアル・ソシエダの久保建英に関する動画です。スカイスポーツのチャンネルでは、プレミアリーグのチャンピオンズリーグに手が届きそうな4チームについて、各チーム一人ずつ、補強すべきプレーヤーについてプレゼンしあっている動画を作成しています。ニューカッスルについて獲得すべきは右ウインガーであり、久保建英を推薦している部分のみを切り取っています。移籍金について実際より低い金額で話しているような気がしますが、実際にどのように話しているのか、チェックしてみましょう。
Hello and welcome back to the Lowdown, everybody. And joining myself and Mikey McCubbin today, it's Sky Sports' senior football journalist and L Sporting director, Mr. Pete Smith. Welcome back, Pete.
Hi, gents. How we doing? We all good?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. The day's gone like this, really, Doogie. I started, as you know, Mike, you might not know. I was sat next to Doogie just before we went on Sports News this morning, didn't I? Managed to pour what I thought was ketchup all over my scrambled eggs. Turned out it was hot sauce.
Oh,
so that's not what you
rough.
need at 7 a.m. in the morning when you dragged yourself out of bed into trying to liven yourself up, get the day off on the right foot.
4 days after a near miss for Millwall as well, your beloved Millwall.
Yeah, no, that was that wasn't great either. But yeah, losing at Burnley at Turf Moor on the final day when they're going for 100 points, going for the title. I saw it coming up. Unfortunately, there was a point where we went 1-0 up and. As it stands table, we were there in the playoffs, but I think it would have been a bit of a miracle if we had made it. But Sunderland, though, you've got the nerves.
I know.
Nerves coming in.
Anyone watching this video, please pray for Sunderland. We need it right now. 5 consecutive defeats, just 1 goal scored in that time.
Woo! I was having a look.
Very nervous.
Is it something like you've just been in 4th position ever since, like, no matter the result, since December, you've just remained.
We've never dropped lower.
Yeah.
We were top until about November time, but miserable form recently, but let's see what happens there. But today, guys, we're not talking about the race to get into the Premier League. We're talking about the race to get into the Champions League and how to stay in the Champions League. But today, we're talking about one signing to take your club to the next level. So consistently qualify for the Champions League is how we're framing this. So we're talking about the sides that are in contention. We'll talk about Newcastle, Chelsea, Forest and Aston Villa. One signing for each club. Mr. Sporting Director will choose between me and Mikey's suggestions. Let's kick off, Mikey.
Newcastle as well next season.
I think the centre-back market is going to be absolutely fascinating this summer with Huijsen, with Gehi. I mean, Gehi being linked with a return to Chelsea. That's an amazing, fascinating story. There's talks about Christian Romero being Atletico Madrid's top centre-back target as well. Then Spurs will probably look at the centre-backs and Huijsen and Gehi again. It feels like a lot of the top clubs in the Premier League will be competing for the same strikers and the same centre-backs. But with that in mind, I didn't want to go down the centre-back route, even though I think you are right to look at it, given the age of Lascelles as well, Byrne, Shah, all over the age of 31, Shah now 33. I actually do think they need a right winger. I know it's been widely talked about, and I don't mean any disrespect on Jacob Murphy, because I think he's had a phenomenal season. Mo Salah, the only player with more assists in the league this year. I think he's got the same amount of goal contributions in the league as Szoboszlai and Foden combined. Really, really impressive campaign from him. But clearly, as we've seen from Arsenal in particular this year, if you are competing in a Champions League, you need 2 players in every position. You need a deeper squad. 8 games guaranteed in the league alone. It's, it costs clubs that haven't been ready for that. So it's not meaning that Jacob Murphy will never play again. It's not meaning that he needs to be sold or whatever, because if Jacob Murphy wasn't playing for Newcastle, he'd be exactly the sort of player that we'd be linking to Newcastle right now if he had these similar numbers at another club. So I think they need a right winger. And the player I'm going to suggest can also play centrally. He can play on the left. He's even played as a second striker and even as a centre-forward during his time. And it's Takefusa Kubo from Real Sociedad. Now, I feel like this is an interesting one because maybe a year ago, this one felt pretty unattainable for Real Sociedad. He was being linked loosely as a sort of Mo Salah replacement if Salah was to leave Liverpool. But Real Sociedad have had a really difficult campaign this year. They currently sit 11th in La Liga. Imanol Alguacil, their long-term manager, who's taken them into the Champions League knockouts. He's consistently sort of, a bit like Arteta, year on year, kind of improved Real Sociedad, or at least kept them at a very, very high level. I think they've never finished lower than 7th under him. He's leaving at the end of the season. He's said that the club haven't offered him a attractive enough contract to stay. And Robin Lenormand, who was their star centre-back, he left for Atletico Madrid. Mikel Merino obviously left. There was speculation around Zubamendi. And Real Sociedad have just had a kind of forgettable season. Not a disaster, but a forgettable one. And Kubo's kind of been sucked into that. At times, he hasn't even always been a guaranteed starter. And this year, just 5 goals and 0 assists in La Liga. But it kind of reminds me of when Newcastle took advantage of Alexander Isak having a poor season at Real Sociedad and suddenly he arrives and turns into the player he has. Because there is undoubtedly a player in Kubo that could go to the very top of the game and be amongst the top 10 players in his position in the world, which I don't think he's at quite yet. But he spent time at La Masia when he was younger, then returned to Japan, gets a move to Real Madrid, never makes an appearance for Real Madrid, sent out on a number of loans to Mallorca, to Getafe, but it's only really at Mallorca that it ever really sticks. Then goes to Real Sociedad, and across 133 games for the club, so coming up to 4 seasons, 0.3 goals and assists per game. And there is something really exciting about watching him, even this year, in a poor Real Sociedad side. You know, he leads the side for shots. Only Sergi Gomez, the former Man City player, who's now their left back, who's actually played further forward as well, has created more chances. He has got just this really fun way about him as well, and Real Sociedad fans absolutely adore him. And his contract does expire in 2029, so I think he'll cost a fair amount of money. But given Real Sociedad need to invest across their squad and are potentially losing Zubamendi again this summer, or I say again, properly losing him after a summer of speculation last year, they definitely need, they need investment. And supposedly he could be secured for around 40 million euros, so around 35 million pounds.
That is such a steal.
Feels like an absolute bargain. And it might end up being more like 45 million pounds, but I still think, given the amount of positions he can play, given the fact that he could play even in central areas in games where they don't need those workhorse midfielders that they've got in abundance, and he offers something a little bit different to Jacob Murphy, who's much more of a outside, get to the byline player. Kubu's going to come inside, link up really nicely with Isak, and he just feels like an opportunity. So for me, he'd be the one I'd go for Newcastle.
Wow. Interesting shout, dude.
Thank you.
Look at that knowledge of the league and pouring out of him. It's incredible. Real Sociedad expert. Yeah, it's a great shout. And obviously the Isak connection's an interesting one, because I was thinking, would they go shopping in La Liga this summer, or do they want to be looking, as Mikey suggested there, for like tried and tested Premier League talent that we know that's going to hit the ground running? Because I think the one thing that Newcastle don't want to do is take a gamble on someone who's going to come in, because they really want to make a success of this Champions League campaign if they can get there. Because I think in their last one a couple of years ago, they were out on their feet, weren't they, by the sort of Christmas, January time, having to play the same 11 over and over again, weekend, midweek, and just across that new league phase format. I think they'll be looking at what Aston Villa have done this year and the impact that they've had. And as I say, I think they've got to have money to spend. So I think Eddie Howe and the recruitment team there might just be leaning more towards, they're not sure bets. So there's no such thing as a sure bet, is there, in the transfer window? But I just wonder if they'll be looking for a more tried and tested. We talked about Mbomo already. That type of player who might have a more easier pathway into coming straight in and delivering off the...
He's definitely arriving with more momentum if they go with him.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So maybe Huijsen at the back and Mbomo on the right wing. Ooh. That'd be quite a tasty summer transfer window, wouldn't it?
That would be a hell of
Not sure if they can stretch the budget that far, but that would be pretty glamorous.
Be about 100 million, wouldn't it?
Huijsen takes the win on the first one.
I think he does.
Okay, okay, there we have it.
I mean,
right.
if he's attainable.
Yeah.
次は解説です。3人ともに特に強いアクセントは感じませんし、両脇の2人は特にはっきりと話している感じもしますので、聞き取りやすい英語ではないでしょうか。ボキャブラリーも難しいものはあまりありませんでしたので、簡単なものも多いですが、本日の解説をチェックしてみましょ
う。
ドラッグアウトは、引っ張るという意味のドラッグに、外へという意味のアウトがついた駆動詞で、比喩的にも物理的にも使われる便利な表現です。例えば会議が長引いたり、話を無理に引き延ばしたりする場面では、時間を引きずるという意味で使われます。また、誰かを無理やり部屋の外に連れ出す、引きずり出すという意味でも使われます。日常会話からニュース、映画まで幅広く使われるので、外へ引きずるというイメージを持っておくと理解しやすくなります。
When you dragged yourself out of bed. When you dragged yourself out of bed. Trying to liven yourself up.
ライブンアップは、生きるという意味のライブンに由来する語で、生き生きさせるという意味合いを持つ表現です。例えば、朝にぼーっとしている時にコーヒーを飲んで元気が出た。パーティーが退屈だったけど音楽で盛り上がった。そんな時に使われます。人の気分だけでなく、場所、雰囲気、イベントにも使えるため、会話の幅を広げるのに役立つフレーズです。また、この動画のシーンのように、誰かを元気にするという意味で人に対して使われることもあります。
Trying to liven yourself up. Trying to liven yourself up. Get the day off on the right foot.
Get the day off on the right foot は、ライトフットが正しい方向や良い方向という意味と、一歩踏み出すというイメージから、一日をうまく始めるという意味になります。朝のルーティンを整えたり、気分の良いスタートを切ったりするときに使われます。逆に、オンザロングフットでは、悪いスタートという表現にもなり、両方セットで覚えると便利で、日常会話、ビジネス、SNS でも使える自然な表現です。
Get the day off on the right foot. Get the day off on the right foot.
Is how we're framing this.
フレームは、もともと額縁や骨組みを意味しますが、そこから派生して考え方の枠組みや物事の捉え方にも使われます。例えば、ある出来事をチャンスとして捉えるのか、リスクとして捉えるのかで、私たちの反応や判断は大きく変わります。そうした物の見方をどう枠付けるかという場合などに使われます。
Is how we're framing this. Is how we're framing this. This one felt pretty unattainable for Real Sociedad.
アンアタテナブルは何かがどれだけ努力しても届かないような状態を表す言葉です。例えば、理想のキャリアや完全な成功、あるいは自分には手の届かない憧れの人など、現実的に達成できないと感じるときに使います。日常会話では感情を込めて、それはちょっと無理かもというときにも使えます。ニュース記事やビジネス英語でも品質なので、形容詞としての使い方に慣れておくと実践的です。
This one felt pretty unattainable for Real Sociedad. This one felt pretty unattainable for Real Sociedad. And Kubo's kind of been sucked into that.
Be sucked into は、文字通り、吸い込まれるというイメージから転じて、望まないのに巻き込まれる。夢中になって抜け出せないといった意味になります。例えば、職場の面倒な人間関係に巻き込まれた時や、つい動画を見すぎてしまった時、または社会的な混乱に取り込まれてしまった時などに使います。自分の意思とは無関係に、状況や流れに引っ張られてしまう様子をとても自然に表せる便利な駆動詞です。
And Kubo's kind of been sucked into that. And Kubo's kind of been sucked into that they've got in abundance. And
in abundance は、物事がたっぷり、十分すぎるくらいにある時に使う表現です。例えば食べ物、資源、才能、愛情など、形あるもの、ないもの両方に使えます。日常会話よりはややフォーマルですが、ニュース記事やビジネス英語でもよく登場し、例えば、野菜が豊富にある地域や、アイデアに満ちた人などを表現するのに便利です。似た表現に、プレンティオブや、アロットオブもありますが、インアバンダンスはより強調されていて、文全体を拡張高くする効果もあります。
So they've got in abundance. They've got in abundance.
And that we know that's going to hit the ground running.
ヒットザグラウンドランニングは、もともと軍隊の用語から来た表現で、地面に着地してすぐに走り出す。つまり、準備万端で新しいことに全力で取り組むという意味になります。ビジネスの現場では、即戦力として活躍する。スポーツでは、デビューから結果を出す。転職や移動などでは、すぐに成果を出すなど、非常にポジティブなニュアンスを含む表現です。日常会話や自己 PR、仕事の面接などでも使いやすく、覚えておくと非常に便利です。
That we know that's going to hit the ground running. That we know that's going to hit the ground running. They were so, they were out on their feet, weren't they?
Out on one's feet は、特に極度の疲労や精神的な消耗を表すときに使われる口語的な表現です。直訳すると、足で立ってはいるけど、もう意識が飛びそうなほど消耗しているという状態を指します。ボクシングでは、ノックアウト寸前で立っているだけの状態を意味し、一般の会話でも、疲れ果てた時に使われます。単なるタイヤードよりも、もう限界ギリギリというニュアンスが強いのが特徴です。
They were so, they were out on their feet, weren't they? They were so, they were out on their feet, weren't they?
いかがでしたか？久保建英の移籍金は6000万ユーロであるはずなんですが、4000万ユーロで獲得できるのでしょうか？確かに4000万ユーロなら安くも感じるほどですが、同時に6000万ユーロはなかなかの金額に感じるんじゃないかとも思いますので、実際に移籍が実現するのかはハードルは高いと思いますが、イマノル監督も辞任し、久保が移籍する可能性もだんだんと大きくなってきているとも感じますね。バルセロナ、レアル・マドリード、あるいはアトレティコ・マドリード以外では、移籍するとすればプレミアリーグになるんだろうと想像できますし、理想的にはリバプール、アーセナル、マンチェスターシティの3クラブだと思いますが、さらにそれ以外となれば、その次に良い移籍として、ニューカッスルが来るのもわかりますし、さらに数年後に、ビッグ3やスペインの3クラブに移籍する可能性を残すなら、チェルシーやマンチェスターユナイテッドなどよりも、 ニューカッスルへの移籍の方が良さそうな気さえします。実際にはどのような移籍になるのか、残留になるのか、まだまだ全然わかりませんが、この夏もこのような話は多くありそうですので、移籍に関するニュースも楽しみにしながら追っていきたいと思います。本日もご視聴いただきありがとうございました。またすぐにお会いしましょう。